let's talk setting up the perfect squat stance. When we're doing it, there's two things that we're going to address. One being the anatomy of your hip or your client's hip, and then the goals and objectives. So before we jump into the anatomy, let's talk about goals and objectives. So if you're dealing with let's athletic populations, bodybuilding, things like that, we're going to want to explore a lot of different ranges of movements, widths of stance, and particularly internal versus external rotational bias. And this is a reason, you would see Kelly Starrett always talking about feet forward squatting like this, right? And you often see us kind of teaching or pushing people a little bit more externally focused. Well, that's because Dr. Starrett is focused on a lot of athletic populations, and you need to be more internally rotated to be able to elicit force in a lot of those sporting applications. Let's say changing direction in a movement on a field, forward movement, so many different applications of that, right? So understand those goals and objectives. Bodybuilder that's lacking, outer quad versus VMO, development, they need to be getting that full sweep, right? Tom Platz's legs. They're going to explore a lot of the different movements to get there. Now, the goals and objectives of a lot of people working with clients in the gym, for example, is to get people out of pain, living a better quality of life, removing back pain, hip pain, knee pain, all these things, which are all driven to maximizing their anatomy so that they can train and develop resilience, or strength athletes that want to be able to load more, and by improving efficiencies of their movement patterns, they're able to load more frequently, more volume, and get stronger, right? Get those adaptations. So understanding the goals and objectives is really, really important when understanding that. Now, with all of those different types, you can still revise that once we understand, refine those squat patterns and make multiple perfect squat patterns based on those applications if we understand the anatomy of the hip. So that's where we're going to go next. That's why Kyle's here, so that we can walk through and do this work with him. On the hip anatomy, there's two things that we're looking at. One is the orientation of the hip, internal, external rotation, which is a lot of where our toe is going to point, right? And then the other is how much movement we can get. So it's really the shape of the hip capsule and where the femur can move within that. So let's go ahead and get down on your back here. We're going to look at the depth of that capsule first. The caveat that must be addressed as we're going into all the discovery around what the hip anatomy is that if you're dealing with either a strength athlete or somebody that's in pain, they may have a lot of tightness around that hip, restricting their motion and throwing your results or observations off, or your observations on yourself. So it's really important that we test both legs, and we're also going to test in multiple variations. But you need to, if you sense that you have a sense of that, please refer to two different things. So all of our series on breathing and bracing mechanics, because that's going to be instrumental, the neuromuscular impact on this and the tightness around the hips, and being aware of those positions as we do that, just like this rib cage position here, as I've just got him in this position. The other one is our body tempering course, which Kyle right here is the one putting that together, which is a really quick way to address these issues. So we can't dive into that stuff here, but I will reference that material as I walk through this piece. So the first piece that we're going to look at is that internal and external rotational bias. You can have a friend do this. I'm going to show the typical assessment, and I'm going to show you how to do it yourself, which actually like a little bit better. It's a very unique way to do it. But we get this hip up in a 90-degree area, and it's really moving to the limit. You might feel a little bit of resistance and push just a little bit into that as you do that. And we can see right here with Kyle, I've got very limited internal and a fair amount of external, right? I definitely want to check the other leg as well, because sometimes you'll see the opposite, which tells us no, we've got some musculature issues as well that we need to deal with here. Okay. Whoops. So I'd be on the other side, but you don't need to look at my back. And we see that we've got balanced internal and external rotational. So that's a good indicator to tell me I can continue with this. Now, we did that test in flexion only. We've also got just the standing portion, right? So that would typically, you could do roll over on your stomach. Again, you could do both of these drills yourself just by engaging the musculature and rotating. So go ahead and do that. Boom. And we see a lot of external. And other way, no internal, right? So I'm going to test, see if I can get a little bit more. And we can see in the standing position, Kyle's got even less internal rotation. So that's a really interesting observation. We'll do the opposite side. Go ahead and do that yourself. And we can see, actually, he's starting to get limited in external rotation. Or sorry, internal, no. Sorry, my bad. We switched legs, you know, passenger driver. Really good, matching external, matching internal. It's like, wow, what happened? I didn't switch my brain. Okay. So the test I like to do, so this is with the hips in the extended. You can also just do this, and I show this in the quick drill, is just stand and see how much movement. And you might not have to move very far. You can really quickly and easily see what that is with the hip extended. In flexion, let's go ahead and get up in a quadruped. So this is a really unique drill. And what we're going to do is actually load up and sit and imagine this capsule coming into the back of the hip here. Okay, and that's going to create a lot of load in this hip and kind of mimic what we're like in a loaded pattern. And you see we're almost in a squat pattern. We could actually bend at the elbows a little bit more and get down in there if we wanted. Not really super necessary, but now with that load on that hip, you're going to, again, engage yourself, and then you can actually use yourself and really feel what you've got there, pushing through a little bit of those muscle tightnesses. On the outside, you might need to grab it with your hand or just grab a little strap or band. I didn't grab one here, and pull that, okay? This is a really great drill because it ensures that if I'm doing this, let's do a dead bug drill by yourself, right? So this is my right hip, like, hey, you can do this yourself. As he does this, go ahead and lay one foot down and do that. And you can see he's bending here to get movement. And so it's going to throw those test results. And so this is why it can be really useful getting in these patterns where we can really see and understand and lock those positions in. And there is definitely very significantly with like getting that capsule, like that hip pushed into the capsule so we can really understand what's happening when we put some load on those structures.
It's a lot easier for me to feel too. On my back, I just feel the tight muscles fighting. When I'm loaded in this position, I can better feel what the joint is actually doing. So it helps me a lot for feedback.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really great drill revision. I don't know anybody that actually does that as a test, so that's a uniqueness, but I use that drill with the loading of the capsule for several different things, which is how I came up with that drill. Being in it myself going, oh, this is really interesting. Yeah. It's also how if you do have some tightness around that hip, that you can actually work while maintaining this to improve your range of motion, literally just with the tools that we showed right there. Now, if you're lacking internal or external rotation on one leg, we've got an imbalance. That's going to show we've got other issues. And that would be going to your body tempering course, working on your breathing and bracing mechanics in there. I don't know if you got a quick like piece that you might have them go to, but
yeah, they're broken down all by different sections. So hip, upper leg, lower leg, things like that. So diving right into the glutes, for example, external rotators can be a quick go-to. Diving into some hip flexors and internal, it can help right away. Yeah,
that's exactly what I was thinking. We'd grab a bench, we'd go into the psoas, it'd help improve internal rotation. You know, glute, massive on that external rotation, some quick kind of fixes there. So the goal with that one is understanding the toe orientation during it? Are you externally or internally rotationally biased? So are you trying to mimic someone and be out here when you should be here, or the other way around? Again, based on objectives, you may still play around in those areas, and we're going to show the next drill of how to incorporate that with refining it in any of those. So this is a really cool and unique drill to kabuki. So now we know the orientation of that hip capsule. Now we want to find basically the shape of it. So this is a scrub test, and what we're doing is we're moving through the top capsule and just really around the bony infield here. And this is something that you would want somebody that's a trained professional to be able to do, and really finding the depth point. So right here, this looks to be it for Kyle, okay? Now, you would think you might be able to just stand and pull up and be able to move around and find that, but really the engagement patterns of the hip flexors, the pull, it's all very opposite of what's actually happening when we load in an axial squat, deadlift, whatever pattern. So this can be useful, but I actually like the drill that I show in the mini sequence better, but we're gonna talk a little bit more depth around this. And it's a rock back test. But we're going to do the rock back test a little different than people do. So let's go ahead and move it out so we can get your hip towards the center. There we go. So we've got this pad. It's turned 90, so we've got a lot of width variations to play with here. Now we elevated this for a couple reasons. As you do this, and this is the uniqueness, is we're going to go ahead and find, we already have the data point around this orientation, so we're going to employ that because you will feel a difference with this. Now we've got a little bit of load in here, and we have the opportunity to create a little bit of intra-abdominal pressure and be able to maintain this position. So we're able to start getting some of the engagement in the right areas. The elevation also lowers the shoulders down, so that as we rock back, this is going to look just like a squat, right? And so what we want to do here is play around with these different widths, right? Until we can find, knowing this piece, where we're going to lose movement at and where we can get the deepest at. So find that point, right? There it is. Maybe just a hair wider, see how that works, right? Yep. And that's right about where I found on the scrub test. And actually with load, bring it back in a little bit, just a hair. And it looks like with load, we're finding it's actually just a little bit wider. That last right there, which is a little wider than I found on the scrub test. So really interesting, right? Let's get those feet into that position where we found. And let's try that again. Boom, good. So now we can see what is the position that's going to allow him to preserve his spine position the best under load with everything activated as far as the width in the capsule. But we can also go, okay, our goals for training are a little different. I'm doing some sprinting. I want to do some field work. Like let's go in, we're going to do some close stance stuff. Not that quite close for you, because we already know that's not great for him. We're going to go fairly, not full straight with the toes, but right there, and run the same test again. Stop. And we can see this is where we need to be with this refinement for these objective needs, right? And if we go beyond this, that's going to be an area that's going to start creating some problems with our loading strategies, muscle tightness, soreness, fatigue, all those things when we're using an inefficient motor pattern. But we can train really well now knowing where our capabilities are. And let's say I wanted to go really toes in. There we go. Let's go out, reset, and test. And we're about here, a little less, okay? But we know it. Now we've got the perfect refinement for that application that we're looking for. Far different. Let's go ahead and reset to your optimal based on your hip mechanics right there. Toes right, not quite that, right there. And lock that in and boom. And we've got a good 3 inches deeper range of motion. And so we're actually able to train other musculature. better. We're able to get into a range that's going to be able to train our adductors, our glutes, so much more of this to a greater depth. So that is how we use these tools to find the perfect squat stance and then dial that for your or your clients' very specific training needs and objectives. Kyle, do you have anything that you would add?
If I'm doing this myself, or we're telling coaches, athletes to do this themselves, would you suggest them looking in a mirror, maybe filming with a camera? Because sometimes what we feel in our hips is different than what you saw. Or
This
what
is a really great one to do with a mirror. So you've got immediate feedback of that and being very aware of where your stance with is in any midst. So if you've got a default, you could do it with a camera, or a front-facing camera may be quite useful as well. But really easy to do that and get the instantaneous feedback, because to get back down, reset, try to remimic it, usually is not a very productive use for this drill. Filming is great for many, many other things, but this, we're trying to explore and find a particular set of data so we can employ that within our training.
with good spinal mechanics too. That's the thing. Like,
Yep.
it could be rounded over or really extended, and if I can't feel what's going on, I need to be able to see that, because it's going to change how we'd actually load that stance if we were actually loaded.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways to find the data sets that we just did, but there's a very specific nature with how we did these drills, with the loading, the positions, and the muscle tension to really get the desired results here. So it's not saying as other ways are bad, not the case, but this is all about getting the right information in the quickest way manner and being able to own that information yourself. Really appreciate you following this all the way through. Look forward to you enjoying more content on EDU Plus.